A past is a hard thing to run from. Here's your look at the new Hasbro G.I. Joe Classified Series, Snake Eyes G.I. Joe Origins Storm Shadow. G.I. Joe Classified Series is loaded with iconic personalities from the epic history of the G.I. Joe franchise. These fan-favorite characters are presented in 6-inch scale with premium detailing, packaging, and accessories with advanced articulation that raises the vibrant heroes and villains of G.I. Joe to the next level. With a robust roster of G.I. Joe and Cobra characters, the Classified Series of G.I. Joe action figures pays homage to the past while embracing the modern for G.I. Joe's fans new, old, and in between. Before we spend some time with Storm Shadow, the first thing we're going to want to do is figure out how tall the figure stands. I would imagine he's probably the same height as Snake Eyes, but we'll know in a second when we do some comparisons. First, stopping the tape measure right to the very top of his head. Storm Shadow stands 6.2 inches in height. Switching that quickly over centimeters, I went for a dramatic pause. The figure is about 16 centimeters, 15.9 to be exact. And because we've already had a look at him, we can move over the likes of Storm Shadow and bring in the likes of Snake Eyes. And as you can see, they're roughly going to be about, let's just move them back a little bit. There we go. There we go. He's roughly going to be about the same height as Storm Shadow. One of the constant problems I'm already seeing with this line is look at the size of their heads. I thought Snake Eyes' big giant melon was big enough on that figure. But when you're looking at Storm Shadow too, it really looks like these figures are getting oversized heads. We'll talk more about that in a second. We'll talk more about the oversized heads in a second. In the meantime, let's have a look at the accessories that come packed with the figure. Now, you remember that Snake Eyes came packed with only one sword. Storm Shadow takes that sword and times it by 2. He comes included with swords matching the same color scheme as the rest of his outfit. And while he does come with a pair of swords, I wouldn't necessarily call them identical swords, because when you're looking at them, there are some differences between the two. For starters, looking at just the blade at the bottom is a straight blade. The blade at the top, though, is curved. And it also seems like when you're looking at the hilt, the ivory white that they've used is a little bit longer on the bottom one than it is onto the top. I mean, they're pretty close, and yet they're not samesies. You can take these and fit them into Storm Shadow's hands. Before I do that, I want to draw your attention to his hands, because again, it kind of looks like Storm Shadow should have hands for holding guns. Like Snake Eyes, he doesn't come included with guns. I guess the plan is that you're supposed to be able to then take the swords, instead of actually having them just resting forward or straight up. I guess the fingers are supposed to make it look like he's resting against his fingers. But it doesn't really do that. If that's the plan, I don't feel it's a successful one. We can go ahead and take the other sword, fit it into his hand as well. And that sword's fit quite comfortably in his hand. This one's a little bit looser. I think it's just more so the grip that they've used for the hand. But they fit in there pretty good. Now, of course, you can display it on the figure. Not really right away, though. On the back, you'll see there's just the hole. But he also comes included with this piece right here. Sort of serves as a makeshift sheaths on the back. Just going to go ahead and take the peg, fit it into the hole. Once that's in place, you can go then ahead, take the swords out of his hand. Take the other sword out of his hand, too. And flip it around. Now, we were talking about the fact that these swords, one was curved, one was straight. I've tried both the swords in the sheaths, and it doesn't seem like they have a designated, one has to fit it on this side or one has to fit it on this side. They seem like they fit both fine. Although with the curve, I find it's actually helpful to twist the curve so it's facing outward. It seems like the sword sits in there a lot easier. And then we can also do the exact same thing on the other side. There we go. And they'll slide just in place. A nice little place to store away the swords if you don't decide you want to display it with the figure. I think I'm probably going to just display Storm Shadow with the swords on the back of his torso for the time being. I kind of wish he could have come with other things as well, maybe a shuriken or two. But at least he does have a place to store the swords when he's not got them in his hands. The figure also comes included with a swappable head sculpt. Maybe for this we'll take the swords out of his hands, or out of the back there just for the time being. When we had a look at Snake Eyes, you'll remember Snake Eyes came with a swappable unmasked head sculpt, and Storm Shadow does the same. Although it's not the same head, picking it up so you can see it up close and personal. This is the head sculpt of actor Andrew Koji, who plays Storm Shadow in the movie. It looks like he does have a scar on the one side of his face. And it does have some decent detailing. I will give it credit for that. But again, similar to Snake Eyes, while I appreciate the fact that they included a swappable head sculpt, I probably would never display the figures with them. Just because when I consider Storm Shadow, I always kind of think of him with the shrouded over mask like this, only really showing the visible eyes. But if you want to see what it looks like, of course, happy to oblige. Go ahead and just take the head and pop it off. And again, these ball joints that they're using, I ask loudly to anybody that's really interested, all 5 of you, does the ball joint have to be this big? They probably could have shrunk that down just a little bit. Anyways, we're going to go ahead and take the swappable head sculpt. Just pop it back onto that ball joint. Oh, what an ordeal. What an ordeal. And you got this head sculpt like that. And just again, to show you the difference between the two. I know, it's more personal preference than anything else. I favor actually kind of liking Storm Shadow with this head sculpt instead. So when it comes to displaying these figures, I'm going to go ahead and pop this back off and replace it with, I feel, the better of the 2 head sculpts. Again, just pop it. There we go. Pop it onto the ball joint. Getting a closer look at now Storm Shadow, now that we've covered off the territory of all his accessories, and there's only really just the figure now to look at. The figure is okay. There are things I really like about the figure, and I feel like there's other things that come up really, really short. We'll talk first about the positive points. I think the sculpting on his outfit is really good. Now, it goes hand in hand with that. While I think the molding is pretty good, lacking the paint that it does, I feel like the figure sort of looks unfinished. Now, when we're looking at the head sculpt starting first, the head sculpt does have some pretty good looking paint. The eyes come across a tad blurry. I think it's just the fact that his eyes, especially this eye right here, is closed so shut. It was a little bit harder, I guess, to probably paint that. He's got really furry caterpillar eyebrows there on top as well. I mean, I would say that that's a good classic-looking Storm Shadow. In the cartoon and the figure, of course, from the 80s, the body, the outfit that he would have worn would have been all white. This isn't quite white. It's kind of more of a cream color. But it does have some really nice molding to it. But when you're looking at it, it's just the molding of the plastic. I really say, though, I mean, if the opportunity is presented, why wouldn't they have gone in there and painted at least something? Now, Snake Eyes, you could make the valid point. Let's just bring the figure in here so you can see. Snake Eyes doesn't look like he's got any paint on him. I know I probably talked about paint in the review, and you know what? I guess to be fair, the torso piece probably wasn't painted and things like his arms were. So at least there was a contrast, even though it was a lot of black on top of black. When we're looking at Storm Shadow, he doesn't benefit from that. It's just cream-colored molded plastic, and that's all it is. There are, sure, yeah, a few little places that they've actually painted. The sides of the shoulders, for example, and this little strip of silver that runs down the middle. Or not quite the middle, off to the side. But when you're looking at the rest of the figure, so much of this is just that cream plastic. Now, again, even when you're looking like the arms, for example, I feel there could have been something that they could have done differently. The texturing sure looks great and fine, but maybe just added a little bit of paint in there. They certainly have saved, I think, the cost of painting this figure with Storm Shadow, because really all you're getting here, other than the silver we talked about earlier and the strip of his vision right across the mask, is the fingerless gloves. That's about the only other thing that they've really painted on this figure. Even like when you're looking at it from the belt, I'm challenging you, find a place where it looks like they've actually painted it. I can't seem to find a place. It's molded cream plastic. And again, it's not a bad thing. It's not like the figure's mold is bad. It's just the fact that it feels like it needs something. It feels like the figure is almost incomplete. Another problem with the figure boils more down to the articulation that we'll talk more about in a second. His legs have almost limited, I mean, they're almost completely limited with what you can do with them due to this skirt piece right here. I suppose you probably could try to take the torso piece off and get access to that where you could just pop this right off. Underneath it, there is technically a finished sculpt. I guess the top part of his pants. This skirt, whether it be movie accurate or not, really does limit then what you can do with the figure. I mean, again, you can do only this with a figure. And for this being a figure that's known for martial arts, it's sort of sad in a way that you really can't do anything with his legs. You can split them out slightly, but as you're doing it, you're not only fighting against the skirt, but you also dislocate the leg, because these legs, of course, drop down for more the purpose of articulation. I'm not really sure necessarily what I would have done differently to it. If they had used fabric, it would have looked off. It would have looked out of place. It's more, I guess, the fault of the way that they designed the costume in the movie. It just doesn't translate well to a figure, because now you've got this big, it's soft plastic, but because it's in the way of things, you really can't do too much when you look at the figure's articulation. Speaking of the figure's articulation, the posability on Storm Shadow is that you can rotate his head all the way around. I know normally on human beings, if you were to do that, you would snap their neck and kill them instantly, but you can do that on action figures. And also, as I'm rotating it, you probably have also seen there's a little ledge right on the inside. That's because there's a hinge joint also working there as well. So not only do you have the benefits of the ball joint, but as well, you can also hinge the head forward and back as well. In addition to that, rooted deep into the collar, there's actually a secondary ball joint at the base of the neck. That then allows the head to move a little bit more further forward, a little bit further back, and you can also move it back and forth just a little bit. That collar piece does limit a little bit what you can do with the neck, but the head more than makes up for it. It saves the day. Speaking of saving the day, one of the problems I thought this figure was going to face is the plates on tops of his shoulders. So yeah, he's got this additional armor piece that sits on his shoulders. I thought when it came to his arms, you'd only be able to do this, right? Because this would have hit this. In actual fact, clever what they've done here, where this plugs into place, and then when you're looking at it inside the torso piece, they've allotted a little gap. That little gap then allows the arms to sink inside the torso, and in fact gives you a wider range of motion. Very clever the way that they've done that. And the neat thing about it too is when you are moving the arms down, I don't feel like it looks unfinished. It also helps too that the sculpt goes all the way in. In addition to that, I'm not sure if I mentioned this with Snake Eyes, but they also have the shoulder crunch, which this moves back and forth as well. Just gives it a little bit more mileage, especially when it comes to them holding swords. He has a swivel halfway up the bicep that allows the arm to rotate all the way around. And Storm Shadow also has a double hinge on the elbow. When it comes to his hands, of course, you can rotate those all the way around and hinge them also back and forth. A little bit more limited just because they do have a little bit more sculpting going on there. Upper torso is on a limbo crunch, so you can also move that forward, and you can arch it all the way back. That looks extremely painful. You can also take Storm Shadow and rotate his body all the way around, or at least the top torso all the way around, and you also can rock it back and forth too. Looks like there is a ball joint working there. Now again, here comes the problem with the legs. Because the skirting has to be there, the legs can... Well, you can get a splits, but it sort of means then that the skirt piece sort of shifts back and forth. I guess going with whatever space it can then free up, and like I said, it just sort of shifts, and as you're doing it as well, you'll usually drop the legs down because it has to then fight against the skirt. So that will give you a little bit more mileage when it comes to moving the legs forward and back. It may look a little awkward and out of place, so you just go ahead and take the legs, pop them back into the cavity, just like that. 3/4 up the way on the thigh, there's also a swivel, so you can rotate that all the way around. Storm Shadow does also have a double hinge on the knee, which was a little tighter on this figure when I initially got it out of the packaging. It has since loosened up a little bit. And then he does also have foot articulation. The feet, I find, on Storm Shadow are very loose, which is a bit of a shame. Not to the point where the figure's going to start toppling over, but they are a little on the loose side, a little too loose for my liking. And there you have Storm Shadow. Let's just get his feet straightened up. And again, bring in his nemesis. Here he's next to Snake Eyes. I guess all things considered, I know we talked a little bit about the big head problems earlier. Snake Eyes has more of a noticeable big head. Storm Shadow, I think, because he's got a little bit more sculpting for his shoulder, sort of blends the feel a little bit better in. Of course, both the figures also do have swappable, interchangeable head sculpts, but really, who are we kidding? If you're going to be picking up figures of both Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, movie or not, I don't think anybody is really, I don't want to make such a quick assumption, but I don't think anybody's really going to want to display these figures with the swappable movie head sculpts. This is my personal guess more than anything else. Of the two, I think I like Snake Eyes. Well, I like Snake Eyes a lot more than Storm Shadow. Storm Shadow has good things going for him, but unfortunately, where I feel Snake Eyes did benefit from having the shinier black versus the matte black, you know, kind of a breakup a little bit on his body, Storm Shadow has so much of this kind of matte cream colored plastic. And because they didn't go in there, they didn't paint things, they didn't enhance some of the things on the figure, the head doesn't look so bad, but the rest of his body, I feel, looks somewhat unfinished. Taking a spin on the old rotisserie, we've got Snake Eyes G.I. Joe Origins Storm Shadow, which, as you'll see, is currently being displayed with his alternate head sculpt, bearing not too bad of a likeness to the actor Andrew Koji, who's going to be playing Storm Shadow in the movie. Admittingly, neither him nor Snake Eyes will be looking unmasked on my shelf. I would rather display them more in a classic OG look. That's the original look, just in case you're curious. But I guess Hasbro wanted to throw it in. It usually is the case when it comes to movie tie-in figures that they like to have masks or helmets on one head sculpt, and then they usually like to be able to tout their skills at sculpting and say, hey, see, we can give you a pretty good likeness of these actors. And those usually come along for the ride. I don't want to speak for everybody, but I'd like to think that most people probably aren't going to be displaying their Snake Eyes or their Storm Shadow unmasked, but I could be proven wrong. Again, I'm probably going to go with more the classic look of Storm Shadow when it comes to him being displayed. Now, the figure is pretty good. I'd already listed my problems when it came to the figure, and I guess I can kind of reiterate here in final looks. While the molding of the figure looks good, the sculpting is pretty decent. It really does lack a lot of paint. They relied, I felt, too heavy on just the molding of the plastic, that sort of off cream color, and felt the need not to add anything else to it. I mean, when you're looking at the figure, I feel he looks unfinished. If it meant even just painting the belt, or painting some of the straps that are on his arm, or painting something, I feel like Snake Eyes got more of the attention to detail when it came to the paint, and Storm Shadow sort of got left off that list. Short of the fact that the paint does really need to be needed for this figure's body to really look finished and complete, again, not a bad looking Storm Shadow with his regular masked face. That's the head sculpt I'm going to go with personally. And then, of course, the alternate head sculpts of both Henry Golding and Andrew Koji are just going to be basically sitting in the plastic tray inside the packaging, or maybe I'll put them in a little Ziploc bag somewhere. I have so many decapitated heads of figureheads that I don't end up using on these figures. I should organize those one day. I'll mark it on the calendar. Organize heads. That's probably going to look a little crazy, I think, when the neighbor stops by for a cup of coffee, looking at the calendar. Oh, today's the day he's organizing his heads. Quickly runs over to call the police. Anyways, which head sculpt would you display with the Snake Eyes G.I. Joe Origins Storm Shadow? The masked head sculpt or the unmasked head sculpt? Which one would you choose? I think it's probably safe to say that most people probably would go with the OG. Probably should make that assumption. Next week I'll be organizing heads. I have to have the neighbor over the following month, so he's not seeing it. If you guys are new to this channel, enjoying all the content you're seeing, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below and turn the bell notification on. And of course, making sure that you're coming back to this channel, even though we have, yes, wrapped up the review of both Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. The review of the Baroness will be coming up shortly after this one. So make sure you keep your peepers peeled to that. And as always, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.